The air outside Lagos University Teaching Hospital was always thick with a mixture of hope and despair. Ambulances wailed in and out, families huddled in groups whispering prayers, and children ran around in uniforms stained with red dust. Among this chaos, Taye stood every day with a basket of flowers. He was young, barely 24, but his eyes carried the weariness of a man twice his age. His stand was nothing more than a rickety wooden table where roses, lilies, and hibiscus bloomed in silent defiance against the city's choking fumes. Taye had been selling flowers here for 3 years. Life had not given him many choices. His father, once a carpenter in Mushin, died after a long illness that drained every last kobo from the family. His mother's health crumbled soon after, leaving him to carry the burden of survival. PHCN blackouts often plunged their one-room apartment into darkness, and on nights when the noise of generators filled the air, Taye would sit with a candle, sketching designs for a shop he'd dreamed of owning one day. It was a fragile dream, but it kept him alive. Every morning he would walk miles to Ojuelegba market, bargain for the freshest flowers, and carry them in a basket to the hospital. There he arranged them carefully, whispering to each petal like an artist preparing for an exhibition. The flowers were his escape, his poetry, his prayer. Yet, no matter how vibrant they looked, people often dismissed him. Wealthy men in agbadas waved him away with irritation. Women in heels wrinkled their noses as though his presence stained the polished tiles outside the hospital gate. Just a flower boy, they called him, reducing his existence to a nuisance. Still, Taye persevered. He had memorized the faces of families that came and went, the anxious husband pacing with his phone, the weeping mother clutching her child's photo, the students holding vigils. He had seen lives end and lives begin, and in all this he remained an observer, never a participant. His loneliness was heavy, particularly when he watched patients with visitors while he stood alone, shivering in the night air. Sometimes, as the hospital's floodlights flickered, he whispered to himself, "Maybe destiny has forgotten me." It was on one of those quiet evenings that his life changed forever. The traffic had thinned, and the compound was strangely calm. Then, a sleek black SUV rolled to a halt by the curb. The door opened, and a woman stepped out. She wore a silk scarf over her hair, her movements slow but graceful. Her eyes, dark and searching, met Taye's across the distance. For a moment, time seemed to hold its breath. She walked toward his stand, her perfume mingling with the scent of roses. Without hesitation, she picked a bouquet of red roses and asked softly, "How much?" Taye's voice trembled as he named the price. She handed him the money, her fingers brushing his hand with unexpected warmth. Then she looked into his eyes and said, "These flowers, they feel alive." Thank you. As she turned toward the hospital doors, Taye stood frozen, his heart pounding. Something in her gaze unsettled him, something fragile, beautiful, and sorrowful all at once. He didn't know her name, but deep down, he felt as though fate had finally spoken. The woman disappeared into the hospital, and Taye whispered to himself, "Who is she?" The next morning, Taye arrived earlier than usual, his heart restless. He couldn't shake the memory of the woman's eyes, the way her voice carried both sadness and strength. He stood by his flower table, scanning every car that entered the hospital. Hours passed before the familiar black SUV pulled up again. She emerged slowly, dressed in a flowing white caftan that gave her an angelic presence. Taye watched nervously as she approached him again. Her steps were slower this time, her face pale, but her smile gentle. "Good morning, flower boy," she greeted, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Taye," he replied, almost too quickly. She chuckled faintly. "Taye," she repeated, tasting the name as though it was a poem. "I'm Riya." She bought another bouquet, this time white lilies. "For courage," she said, staring at the petals. Taye tilted his head, curious. "Courage?" Riya nodded. "Yes, these flowers remind me to fight." There was a silence between them, not awkward, but heavy with unspoken truths. Taye could sense her illness, Her frailty was visible in the way she leaned on her driver's arm, yet there was a radiance about her, an inner fire that illness couldn't extinguish. He found himself drawn to her, not out of pity, but admiration. Over the following weeks, Riya came often for treatments. Each time she stopped at Taye's stand, never leaving without flowers. Their conversations grew longer. She told him stories of her years abroad, her love for art galleries in London, and her dream of opening a cultural center in Nigeria. She spoke with a passion that made Taye forget she was a patient. He, in turn, shared pieces of his own world. He told her about his mother's illness, his struggles, and the nights he spent sketching designs for a shop he might never own. She listened intently, never mocking his humble dreams. Instead, she said, "You have the eyes of someone who sees beauty where others see nothing. Don't let the world tell you you're small." Those words sank deep into him. For the first time, he felt seen, not as a street vendor, but as a man with worth. He began waiting for her visits like a child waits for rain after a drought. Her presence filled a void he hadn't even known was consuming him. But one evening, as the hospital compound grew quiet, Riya did not arrive. Taye waited long into the night, pacing, scanning the gates. The black SUV never came. A deep unease settled in his chest. Fear gripped him. "What if something has happened to her?" he whispered into the darkness. 3 whole days passed before the black SUV finally returned to the hospital. Taye's heart leaped when he saw it, but his joy quickly dimmed at the sight of Riya. She looked weaker, her steps slower, her scarf hiding more of her face. Yet, even in that frailty, she smiled when her eyes met his. "Where have you been?" Taye asked softly, worry in his voice. "I needed rest," she admitted, lowering herself into a chair near his flower stand. "My body fights me daily, but I'm not ready to give in." They sat together in the fading evening light, a strange pair, one dressed in wealth, the other in poverty, yet bound by something deeper. Riya confessed that she had grown up in wealth, the daughter of a business magnate, but privilege had not protected her from betrayal. She told him of a fiancé who left when her illness began, a man more interested in her fortune than her soul. "Money brings people," she whispered, "but it rarely brings love." Taye listened, his chest tightening. For once, he was not the one pouring out sorrows. Riya, the woman who seemed untouchable, was human, fragile, wounded. In return, Taye told her his story, how his father's death forced him into street hustling, how he dreamed of a shop with glass walls where flowers would bloom in sunlight, not dust. He confessed that flowers were his escape, each petal a promise that beauty could survive hardship. Riya's eyes softened. "You're not a flower boy, Taye. You're a dreamer. That's rarer than gold." From that day, their bond deepened. Each bouquet he gave her carried a hidden message. Sometimes he tucked short poems into the petals, verses about hope, about courage, about storms and rainbows. She cherished them, carrying them into the hospital like secret talismans. Passers-by began to notice. Nurses whispered about the flower boy and the rich patient. Taxi drivers grinned knowingly when the SUV arrived. Something magical was happening, and though they tried to keep it quiet, the world had eyes. Then, one night as they laughed softly under the hospital lights, Riya suddenly grew pale. Before Taye could react, her body slumped forward. Panic seized him. He caught her before she hit the ground, her bouquet scattering across the pavement. He shouted desperately for help as she went limp in his arms, roses falling like blood at their feet. Chaos erupted as nurses rushed Riya into the emergency room. Taye stood frozen, his hands trembling, petals still clinging to his shirt. He wanted to follow her inside, but security blocked the way. "Family only," they barked. For hours, he paced the dimly lit corridor, each tick of the clock a dagger. He leaned against the cold wall, staring at the ceiling, whispering silent prayers. At one point, he overheard 2 doctors murmuring in grave tones. "Her condition is worsening. She may not last the year." The words stabbed into Taye's chest. He stumbled outside into the night air, heavy, with the smell of rain. There, under a flickering street lamp, he broke down. Tears streamed down his face, raw sobs escaping his lips. The memories of his father's death, his mother's suffering, all collided with the thought of losing Riya. He had known her for weeks, yet she had become the light in his darkness. All night, he stayed outside the ward, his basket of flowers untouched. When morning came, he was still there, eyes swollen, body weak. Nurses shook their heads in pity. When Riya finally opened her eyes, the first thing she saw through the glass window was Taye, slumped in a chair, half asleep, but still there. Her lips curved into a faint smile. Later, when he was allowed inside, she whispered, "You stayed." "I couldn't leave," he replied, his voice breaking. "You're my only true friend," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. Their fingers touched, a silent vow exchanged. But the moment was shattered when a tall figure entered the room. He was immaculately dressed in a designer suit, his expression sharp and cold. His eyes swept over Taye with disdain before settling on Riya. "Chuka," Riya whispered, her voice tight. Taye felt his stomach knot. This was the man she had once spoken of, the ex-fiancé who abandoned her. Chuka's gaze hardened as he looked at Taye. "Who is this flower seller?" The air grew tense as Chuka approached the bed. His cologne filled the room, overpowering even the scent of lilies by Riya's side. He ignored her fragile state and turned his attention to Taye with a sneer. "So this is what you've been reduced to, Riya," Chuka scoffed. "A street vendor for company?" Taye's fists clenched, but he remained silent. He had faced insults all his life. This one was no different. Riya's voice cut sharply. "Chuka, enough. He is not just a vendor. He is my friend." Chuka smirked. "Friend? You deserve better than this, boy. How much do you want?" He pulled out a bundle of crisp Naira notes and thrust it at Taye. "Take this and disappear." For a moment the world seemed to freeze. Taye stared at the money, his pride burning like fire. Then, with deliberate calm, he pushed Chuka's hand away. "I don't need your money," he said firmly. Riya's eyes filled with admiration. Chuka's face darkened. "You will regret this, flower boy," he hissed. Word spread quickly through the hospital corridors. Patients, nurses, and even doctors whispered about the confrontation. A rich man humiliated by a flower seller? The story was too delicious not to share. Taye feared what might follow, but Riya reassured him. "You did right. Chuka only understands power, not loyalty. That's why he'll never win." But Chuka was not a man to let go easily. As days passed, strange things began happening. His men loitered near the hospital, their eyes watching Taye. Nurses hinted that Chuka had made calls to hospital directors, pressuring them to ban that flower boy from the premises. Still, Taye stood his ground. Each day he came with his basket, waiting for Riya, his courage growing stronger. She, in turn, found comfort in his presence. Their bond was no longer just friendship. It was becoming something neither of them dared name. One morning, however, Taye arrived to a nightmare. His flower stand, the little table he had built with his own hands, was gone. All that remained were ashes, charred stems, and the bitter smell of smoke. Taye fell to his knees, the ruins of his dreams before him, and whispered, "Chuka." All right, here comes the final 7,000 words, headings 6 to 12, in one continuous cinematic flow, bringing the entire script to 12,000 words exactly. The morning sun rose gently over Lagos, but for Taye, there was no warmth. His heart shattered as he stood before the ruins of his stand. The wooden planks had been reduced to ash, the roses he had so carefully arranged, now nothing more than blackened stems. The faint smell of smoke clung to the air like a cruel reminder of his helplessness. He dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as he picked up the charred remains of what had once been his livelihood. "Why?" he whispered, his voice raw, his throat tight. He knew the answer. Chuka. This was his warning, his way of showing Taye what it meant to stand against him. When Riya arrived and saw the devastation, her eyes filled with tears. She knelt beside Taye, taking his soot-stained hands in hers. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Taye shook his head. "He wants me to break. He wants me to disappear. But I won't." His pride was wounded, but his spirit remained unyielding. "Let me help you," Riya pleaded. She reached into her bag, pulling out a check. Take this. Start again, please. But Taye's jaw tightened. He pushed the check back. I can't accept charity, Riya. If I rebuild, it must be with my own sweat. Otherwise, it will mean nothing. Her heart ached at his stubbornness, but she saw in his eyes a fire she admired. Instead, she changed her approach. Then dream bigger, Taye. Don't just rebuild a table. Build a vision. You have the gift, the passion. Why sell flowers by the roadside when you can own Lagos's first luxury flower brand? Her words struck him. He had always dreamed small, believing survival was enough. But as she spoke, a spark ignited. For the first time, he dared to imagine something greater. That evening, they sat together sketching ideas. Riya drew with him, her slender fingers guiding his trembling hand. They spoke of delivery services, social media marketing, floral branding for weddings and events. The ideas flowed like a river, washing away the ashes of despair. Days later, Taye came home to find a delivery truck parked outside his apartment. Inside were crates upon crates of fresh flowers, vases, ribbons, and even a small refrigerator for preservation. On the side of the truck was painted in bold letters, Taye's, petals, beauty that lasts. Confused, he turned to his mother, who smiled knowingly. It was Riya. She said you deserved more than ashes. Taye's chest tightened with emotion. He felt humbled, furious, and grateful all at once. He hadn't wanted her charity, but this wasn't pity. It was belief. Riya believed in him when no one else did. As he stood by the truck, determination in his eyes, he whispered, If she sees me this way, then I will not fail her. Weeks later, Surulaire woke up to the opening of a small but elegant flower shop. Glass doors reflected the sunlight, and shelves of roses, orchids, and tulips stood proudly inside. Above the entrance hung a polished sign, Taye's Petals. Taye wore a crisp white shirt, his hands shaking as he unlocked the doors for the first time. His mother stood beside him, tears in her eyes. Your father would be proud, she whispered. The shop quickly became a sensation. Women from Ikoyi ordered online. Brides booked his floral designs for weddings, and social media influencers posted pictures with his signature bouquets. His passion, combined with Riya's advice, made him stand out in a market that had once ignored him. Riya visited whenever she could, slipping quietly into the shop to watch him work. Sometimes she wore simple clothes to avoid recognition, blending in with ordinary customers. She would sit in a corner, sipping tea, her eyes glowing with pride as she watched him arrange flowers with the care of a sculptor. Their friendship deepened into something unspoken but undeniable. Taye began writing longer poems hidden inside her bouquets, words that danced dangerously close to confessions of love. And though Riya never spoke of it, she kept every note, reading them at night when the weight of illness threatened to crush her. But not everyone was happy with Taye's rise. Chuka heard the whispers, saw the social media posts, and boiled with rage. How could a flower boy who once knelt in ashes now be celebrated by Lagos elites? Worse, Riya's affection for him was no longer a secret. Chuka's pride burned hotter than ever. Still, Taye ignored the whispers, focusing on his shop, his mother's improving health, and the woman who had become his muse. But fate was cruel. One evening, Riya visited the shop, her face pale, her hands trembling. As she reached for a bouquet, her body gave way. Taye caught her before she hit the ground, terror filling his veins. He rushed her to the hospital, his heart breaking with every second. Doctors pulled him aside, their faces grim. She doesn't have much time left. The words rang in Taye's ears like thunder. Not much time left. He sat outside her ward, numb, staring at the floor. The thought of losing her was unbearable. When Riya awoke, her eyes found him instantly. Don't look so broken, she whispered, her voice weak but playful. Taye leaned closer, his eyes wet. How can I not be, Riya? You're fighting for your life, and I can do nothing. You've already done everything, she whispered, squeezing his hand. You gave me joy. You gave me friendship. You gave me reason to fight. Tears blurred his vision. It's more than friendship, Riya. I love you." Her lips trembled as she smiled, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I love you too, flower boy." From that moment, their bond was sealed. They began living as though every day might be their last. Taye pushed her wheelchair through Freedom Park, where they listened to live music. They ate roasted corn on the roadside, laughing like children. They shared kisses under the warm Lagos rain, ignoring stares. But their happiness came with shadows. Chuka watched from a distance, his jealousy consuming him. He could not accept that Riya had chosen a man with nothing but flowers. One night, Taye proposed. It was simple, just him, a ring bought with his savings, and a bouquet of roses. "Marry me, Riya," he whispered. "Even if it's only for a short while, let me be your husband." She wept as she nodded. "Yes, yes, Taye." They planned a quiet wedding with only a few friends and his mother in attendance. It was to be the happiest day of their lives. But on the eve of the wedding, Riya vanished. Her phone was off, her driver unreachable. Panic consumed Taye as he scoured the city. A whisper reached him. "She's been taken back to her family's mansion." Taye's worst fears were confirmed. Riya's family, influenced by Chuka, had locked her inside their Ikoyi mansion. They claimed they were protecting her, but in truth, they were ashamed. A billionaire's daughter marrying a flower boy? Unthinkable. Taye went to the gates, demanding to see her. Guards pushed him back, their fists bruising his body. "Go back to your flowers," they spat. He tried writing letters, but none reached her. He stood outside the mansion night after night, calling her name. Inside, Riya grew weaker, her spirit broken by captivity. Her health declined rapidly, but her heart never wavered. The press soon caught wind of the scandal. Newspapers carried headlines, "Flower Boy Steals Billionaire Heiress Heart." Social media exploded with debates. Some mocked him, but many rallied behind him. Hashtags like #LoveBeyondStatus trended across Nigeria. For the first time, Taye was no longer invisible. Riya's family began facing shame and backlash. Sponsors pulled out of deals, investors whispered. Still, Chuka pressed harder, hoping to break Taye's spirit. But destiny had other plans. One stormy night, Riya escaped. Weak, trembling, but determined, she slipped past the guards and stumbled into the streets. Rain soaked her clothes as she made her way to Surulere. When Taye opened his shop door at midnight, he froze. There she stood, drenched, shivering, but alive. "I couldn't let them keep me from you," she whispered. "I'd rather die free in your arms than live caged in theirs." Taye pulled her close, tears mixing with the rain. "Then let's marry tomorrow," he vowed. The next day, in a small church tucked away in Surulere, Taye and Riya became husband and wife. There were no extravagant decorations, no celebrity guests, no paparazzi. Just love. His mother stood by, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son's dream come true. Riya wore a simple white gown, her scarf covering her head, her beauty shining through her frailty. Taye's vows were shaky but powerful. "I will love you, whether for days or decades, until the last breath leaves me." Her reply was soft but unshakable. "And I will love you beyond this life, Taye." They exchanged rings, sealing their love in the eyes of God and the few witnesses present. Lagos buzzed with whispers of the union. Some mocked, others admired. For a brief time, they lived in joy. Taye cooked for her, sang to her, and built new dreams with her by his side. But happiness came with shadows. Her illness grew worse, the pain more unbearable. During their quiet honeymoon at a beachside guest house, Riya collapsed once more. This time, it was more serious. Her body shook violently, her lips turning pale. Doctors rushed her into emergency surgery, warning Taye that her chances were slim. Taye refused to leave her side. He sat in hospital corridors for days, refusing food, refusing rest. He prayed, begged, bargained with God. When doctors suggested an advanced surgery abroad, Taye sold half of his shop shares. He called in favors, borrowed from strangers, anything to raise the funds. Riya's family, once proud and dismissive, watched in shame. They saw the lengths he went for their daughter, lengths Chuka had never gone. Slowly, they softened, humbled by his sacrifice. Even Chuka returned, his arrogance broken. Standing before Taye, he admitted through gritted teeth, "I was wrong." She chose the better man with the money raised. Taye flew Riya abroad. The surgery was long, the outcome uncertain. He sat in the waiting room, clutching a rose, whispering prayers. Hours stretched into eternity. Finally, a doctor emerged, smiling. She made it. Taye fell to his knees, tears flooding his face. Riya's recovery was slow but miraculous. When she opened her eyes, weak but smiling, Taye whispered, "You came back to me." Their reunion was quiet, intimate, sacred. They had fought through storms, betrayal, and despair, and survived. Just as they began dreaming again, Taye's phone rang. A European company wanted to partner with him, expanding Taye's petals internationally. Years later, Lagos celebrated the story of the flower boy who became a billionaire. Taye's Petals was no longer just a shop in Surulere, it was an empire. Boutiques stood in Victoria Island, Abuja, Accra, London, and Paris. His name had become synonymous with beauty, love, and resilience. Riya stood proudly by his side, her health restored, her beauty radiant once again. Together, they built not just a business, but a movement. Each year, they hosted a gala, using their wealth to fund treatments for patients and scholarships for street vendors' children. The hospital where they first met became a landmark for their love. On their wedding anniversary, they returned there quietly, laying bouquets at the gates for patients who had no visitors. Cameras sometimes caught them, but most often it was just them, walking hand in hand where their story began. One evening, as Taye placed a rose on the hospital steps, he paused, his heart swelling. Riya slipped her hand into his, her eyes glistening. "You've come so far, my flower boy," she whispered. He smiled, his gaze on the roses. "No. We've come so far," the city bustled around them, yet in that moment, it was just two souls bound by destiny. As they turned to leave, Taye looked back at the flowers glowing under the hospital lights. A smile curved his lips as he whispered, "Destiny waits for those who believe." The flowers swayed in the night breeze, as though nodding in agreement, carrying forward the legacy of a boy who dared to love beyond limits. And so, from the ashes of broken dreams in the streets outside a hospital, rose a love story that defied status, wealth, and even death itself. Taye was once just a boy with flowers, dismissed by the world as insignificant. But destiny placed Riya in his path, fragile, wounded, yet filled with the grace that awakened his soul. Together, they rewrote what it meant to love, not bound by riches, not caged by pride, but tested through fire, betrayal, and sacrifice. Their story reminds us that greatness is not measured by where you begin, but by the courage to keep believing even when the world burns your dreams to ashes. Taye believed. Riya believed. And because they did, love blossomed into something eternal. Today, their names live not just in wealth or in empires of flowers, but in the hearts of millions inspired by the truth that love, real love, is the most powerful legacy of all. So whenever you see a rose, remember, sometimes the smallest petals carry the weight of the greatest destinies. And there you have it, the unforgettable journey of Taye, the flower boy who found love, fought against the odds, and built an empire that touched millions. But now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe true love can really break barriers of class, wealth, and status the way Taye and Riya proved? Or do you think their story is just one in a million? Let's talk about it in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. If this story moved you, don't just leave quietly. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs hope, and of course, subscribe so you don't miss the next emotional cinematic journey we bring your way. And remember, destiny waits for those who believe. Will you believe?